Here we go. Season 7.
All aboard!
If you missed it, here's what we believe. 66-book canon. We believe in a 66-book canon. There is no more. There is no less. It's 66 books.
That Yeshua, who is preached by the apostles in the Gospels and in the epistles, is the only means of salvation, as we're calling Yeshua means.
In other words, justification is by faith alone and not by works that any man should boast.
Faith working through love.
We are unashamedly Trinitarian. We're also unashamedly believe in the doctrines of grace, what is commonly referred to as Calvinistic.
The new covenant is not time-bound. That is to say that the horizon of the faith of our father Abraham is no different.
Right.
It is not shy of the horizon of our hope and our faith.
In other words, that salvation was the same for Abraham as it is for us.
Right.
It is Wednesday, May 6th, 2020. This is Messiah Matters number 299. Hairstyle almost to Fabio level. My name is Caleb Haig.
Also in desperate need of a haircut, I'm Rob Van Hoff.
Can you believe what's going on around here? I mean,
here, meaning the world?
Yeah, I am Washington State. That's where I live. So, I mean, I was in the bank the other day, sitting amongst some tellers. Okay, and we were talking about how like I'm ready to go get a black market haircut, and the teller was just laughing because he was like, "Can you imagine like some dude with a really nice haircut walking up with a trench coat and pulling out like different hairstyles like." Look, I got the good stuff. Mullet, perm. What do you need, bro?
That's funny.
How's it going, man?
It's going well.
Yeah.
Going well. Just plugging away. We're in basically midterm right now for spring quarter at Torah Resource Institute. We've got
hang on just a second.
Issues.
You are super quiet on my. No, it's not you. Don't turn up. Okay, keep going.
Move closer to the mic.
There you. No, you're fine. Keep going.
I'm also using a new mic. Baruch Hashem. This is I've joined the ranks of Caleb, and I'm using a condenser that uses phantom power, and I'm hoping that'll be my voice will sound as cool as Caleb's, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, we're doing the critical issues. Your father and I are tag teaming pretty much week by week through a critical issues class, contemporary Judaism's class, literature from the Second Temple period, and Greek, of course. Yeah. Boy, the Greek students, I feel it. You know what I mean? I know it's like paradigm. And you know, Dr. Mounts, we use Dr. Mounts's Bill Mounts or William Mounts. He's got an awesome Greek curriculum through Zondervan that we've used. Caleb, I think this might be the 7th or 8th year I've taught through that first year Greek. And he has this image of the fog.
Right.
If you remember you worked through that book. Like the fog, like as you're learning Greek, this fog follows you, you know? And so the more recent stuff is kind of foggy, but as you get out, things that are further back tend to get more clear because you've seen them more and more. And so I wonder, I'm like, that's such a good metaphor. I'm wondering, you know, other areas in life where it can be that way, you know, not just Greek.
No doubt. Yeah, I'm messing around with our camera angles here. Sorry.
Man, that's all right.
Okay, well, we got, you know what? I'll tell you what. Let's just jump into this.
Yeah, what are we looking at? Today?
Well, hang on just a sec. Let me fix this real quick because this is not right. I can tell. I can tell already that this is going to bother me. So let me just fix it real quick.
Okay.
And then we'll just get going here. Okay.
So yeah, you guys, I don't know what Caleb's doing right now. I just trust he's the technical guru. So
Yeah, well, let's bring this back just a little bit more. There we go. Okay. And let's fix it for everybody at home. There you go. My OCD comes out. I don't really have OCD, but whatever. Okay. Okay. We got a lot to talk about today. And why? Because we got people writing in such good stuff. And let's just go with this. Joshua writes, should we talk about this one first? Yeah, okay, let's do this one first, because I think this should be a fairly quick answer. Okay. Joshua writes, and he says, hello, Caleb and Rob. Love you guys in Yeshua and the content you produce. Thank you very much, Joshua. I appreciate that. I love that you have been faithfully doing this for so long and that people like me can binge listen to you guys while I'm working, but I have a sincere question. So I can always tell a person's heart, and this is a good one because he starts out, this is like and he does exactly what I've talked about on this show, which my wife does quite often. It's the compliment sandwich, which is compliment, this is what's wrong, compliment again. That way the person, and which is good. I mean, this is a good example of the compliment sandwich, except for I took out the end part for show length purposes. Anyway, yes, and the nice thing about a compliment sandwich is that usually a person is more apt to take it the right way, which I believe Rob and I have done. Okay, so here is the critique. You guys seem to give scholars, quotes, scholars, and educated theologians, quotes again, a pass on the heresy stamp, while very much branding your brothers, who at the very least are more suspect of being in the new covenant, i.e., they have the testimony of Yeshua and keep the commandments of the Lord. Okay, let's pause for just 1 second. I believe that anybody who has faith in the Messiah Yeshua is part of the new covenant. And I don't believe that has anything to do with works.
And I believe they're keeping commandments now.
Right, exactly. So
we're going to, that's where we need to probably parse some hairs, but keep going.
So, I mean, the idea that because this person keeps the Sabbath but is a gossip is better than this person who doesn't keep the Sabbath but doesn't gossip, we're all sinners. Right? We're all sinners. Anyway, let's keep going with, I think I understand what he's attempting to say, which is that we are more down on people in the Hebrew roots movement.
So, for example, we could say, well, Rob just plugged Zondervan Series for Biblical Greek,
right? Taught
by Professor Mounts,
right?
Who I think would probably come from a Reformed perspective, I would imagine. I don't know all his theology,
right?
But I know his translation of the New Testament in certain places, and he would definitely be of a school, I would presume, that says, yeah, Jesus said all foods are clean, or
right,
or the Sabbath has been moved to Sunday, So I hear what it sounds like Joshua is saying is like, look, you're being very kind in that regard, but you're not. That kindness is not a standard that you are using equally across the board.
Fair enough. And let's keep going with his email. I think you're right in what he's saying, in your assessment of what he's saying. So he goes on. Yes, they may not have the same pedigree you guys do, but at the very least, most seem to, and he's talking now about the Hebrew roots teachers, I believe, most seem to get that salvation is by faith in Yeshua, and we need to be keeping his Torah. Note, not all.
Note, not all.
Not all believe that it's by faith in Yeshua alone.
Oh, okay.
Now, he goes on. How they go about that is up to them and the Father. And you guys seem very vocal and open about them. And I appreciate this. But when it comes to scholars like Walter Kaiser, now I'm glad he brings up Walter Kaiser. We'll use him as an example. And he says, for example, right, and say in one video, he is even the exception, even though he is teaching just as much or arguably even more heresy to the body of Yeshua by abrogating even the least of the commandments. I just don't understand this about you guys. Why so much love for the educated, yet so much disdain for those who want to keep the Torah? When if the Torah observant people might teach a heresy, scholars and theologians teach just as much. Okay, this is a great question.
Okay, so I get what he's saying. What I'm hearing saying is that basically Kaiser's a heretic, or that he teaches heresy, and you guys give him a pass.
Right.
But you have someone teaching who's uneducated, let's say, meaning they don't read the original languages, they're and they have, let's say, they're questioning the canon. Right.
I don't even think it's that. I think it's more.
Okay.
I think it's more that. And this comes down to the idea of we need to look at individual teachings. And I'm glad that Kaiser was the example brought.
I'm glad he gave example, because just to say scholars doesn't help. It's good. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, Walter Kaiser is a great example, and the reason why is because Walter Kaiser is the textbook that I used in my hermeneutics class, right? Kaiser wrote the textbook that I used in my hermeneutics class. One of the reasons that I respect Dr. Kaiser so much is because he has a very, what I would call, favorable view of the Torah and the covenants. Now, he believes in what is called built-in obsolescence, something that we have not only talked about on this show, but that we have said is very wrong. We don't believe there's built-in obsolescence within the Torah. So I haven't given a free pass to Walter Kaiser. What I've done is I've said that I think that he has a lot right, and perhaps even more than other biblical scholars.
Right.
But here's the difference between a Walter Kaiser and someone. I'm not going to mention any names, but let's just throw out choose Hebrew root teacher. Insert name here.
Insert name.
And the reason why I'm going to I would rather sit on a Sunday and listen to Walter Kaiser than sit on a Saturday and listen to this other person. And I'll tell you why. Because Walter Kaiser and I come to the text with the same hermeneutical understanding. We might disagree on the outcome due to hermeneutics. In other words, he might have a different interpretation than I do, but at least we come with the same rules of interpretation. When I see these Hebrew roots teachers, what you got Paleo-Hebrew interpretation, et interpretation. You got more than a 66-book canon interpretation. You got deity of Yeshua issues. You got, the list, sacred name issues. The list just goes on and on and on and on. And what is more, you have no education to try to back up the claims that you are making. So not only is it coming to the text with a different hermeneutic, but it's coming to the text ignorantly with a different hermeneutic. Look, somebody might say to me, in Kaiser's book, I think he gives 5 different ways of interpretation. Somebody might say to me, I come to the text with a totally different view of hermeneutics than you do, and this is the form of hermeneutics that I take. If that person is educated, I'm still going to have to deal with the fact of hermeneutics at the very root level.
Yeah, it's like, here's a funny thing. It's like we can say, hey, we're going to build a house, and you call all your friends. We're going to build a house today. You guys are going to help me build my house. So bring your tools. I've got all the lumber.
Right.
I've got all the hardware. I just need you to bring your tools. And one dude, people show up, they bring their hammer, their drill, their, a level, this kind of, and then, but one dude shows up with a chainsaw, a chipper, and an axe.
So, see, to me, okay, hang on just a second.
And you're like, dude.
To me, that is scholars who use a different form of a different hermeneutical.
That's what I mean. It's like the people who brought the hammers and the drills and the things that are going to help you.
Even the chainsaw. To me,
the chainsaw is the wrong tool.
Yeah, but to me, the chainsaw is a scholar who has a different form of interpretation. In other words, we use a
but he's not going to help. His chainsaw is not going to be any good building the house.
Exactly, and that's why there are scholars that I don't think are any good and any help to me.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's okay. So we're talking
now. What I see the Hebrew roots people who have no education and don't even understand the different forms of interpretation. What I see them as, and.
Those are the guys they've never seen a hammer or a screwdriver.
No, look, my son the other day said to me, Dad, You and mom, this is the true story, by the way. He says to me just last week, he said, Dad, my son is 7, by the way. He says, Dad, you guys keep talking about making an add-on to the house. I said, yes, that's right. He said, you keep talking about thousands of dollars. I said, yes, that's right. He said, I'll tell you what, you buy the materials, you give me $2 and I will build it for you.
Yes.
That's the Hebrew roots teacher.
Oh,
You have no skill to be able to even wield a hammer. You don't even know, you don't even have the basic skills. And not only that, but if I gave you the text, what happens is exactly what these Hebrew roots teachers do.
Here's another way. Okay, would this gel with this? It has to do with humility and correctability.
Yes.
Dr. Kaiser, Dr. Mounts, Dr. Petrie,
Right.
Dr. Petrie,
Roman Catholic.
He's a Roman Catholic. He will argue that the Mass today is a direct, goes directly back to the Passover, right? And we're like, no. He kept going straight. Where we like, no, the road curves here, right? And so we've never talked about these guys. Well, maybe Dr. Mounts, we don't talk about him much, but like Petrie and Michael Brown and so Dr. Brown, Dr. Kaiser, others, we've always said good, and then we've said, but here's the issue. So we've never just given somebody a clean pass.
And that's the thing, is that if you go back and listen to,
But-
I mean,
but
we've interviewed Dr. Brown on this show, but we have also excoriated some of his views on things like Itzhak Shapira's book, The Kosher Pig.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, his view on Armenian theology, he didn't get a pass on any of that. And guess, I just talked to Dr. Brown in person last November, and we had a great conversation. Keep going.
So this idea is correctability versus receiving correction. All those guys are products of a system of where they've had multiple teachers, and they've had to do some hard foundational work, and that means there's an honorable element to those that have shown the humility and long-term discipline to actually learn, and it without a presumption of knowing it all, but rather learning and taking in information of people who've gone before, and then trying to articulate your own voice within that conversation. And that's what they're doing. In the other, these, what I call these other people that the emailer is contrasting us with, that the other brothers that we brand because they're not educated, I would say my experience of the people that I know, that I've interacted with, that I would imagine he's talking about, are not correctable. They have a presumption to know it all, and they don't listen. They don't listen. That's me trying to map this email onto my own experience.
Let's also say this. This is not across the board. So, for instance, there are people who are in, I think, what would be termed more Messianic Judaism. And I know that there's a fine line between these two different terms. But, you have people like David Rudolph, like Mark Kinzer, like J.K. McGee, right? These guys are guys who have actually been to school. They have done some hard work. We disagree with them thoroughly on a lot of issues that we think are very important, but we've had conversations about them, and it's not
there's no place where we give a free pass, for example, to a Kinzer or a Rudolph
But there are certain people that, I will say this, there are certain people that we haven't talked about on this show at all, and one of the reasons why is because, you know what, they're doing their work, and it's not, we disagree with it, but it's not like we need to beat some drum over certain issues. Where it really comes down to is when you're talking about things that are clearly not historically accurate, or or things that were even around in Yeshua's time, things like Paleo Hebrew interpretation, all these kind of things, and Pardes or any of this kind of stuff. Right. And all of a sudden, people are trying to teach whole congregations and lead people's spiritual life from this. Those are the things that we are going to say, not a chance. If you want to sit down and say, I don't think that, I think that the Torah is only for the Jews. Okay, well, guess what? This is something that a lot of scholars in modern Christianity believe, and a lot of people in the Messianic realm believe as well. Those are things that we need to discuss and talk about. We're going to call it out, though. And we do, right? We do. And this is one of the things that we've actually talked about Michael Brown. We've talked to and about Michael Brown on this issue. He doesn't think that the Torah is even applicable today. Okay.
So I would say my basic response to that email, first of all, thanks for the email. Thanks for the, what'd you call it? Something sandwich?
Oh, yeah, the compliment sandwich.
Thank you for the compliment sandwich. My basic, if I were just to put a one line, I'd say look into the scholars that we have talked about and I'd say we disagree with completely. So it seems like the email does not acknowledge the existence of those. It just sounds like the scholars we talk about that, that don't promote what we call a one Torah position, we give a pass. So, and that's not a full accurate picture.
Okay. Let's move on. We got a little bit of time. This might take longer than expected, but Evelyn, who's in the chat room right now, wrote in and she says, could you please help me understand what Paul means when he says the following? This is from 1 Corinthians 15:29. It says, otherwise, what do people mean by being baptized on behalf or in behalf of the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why are people baptized on their behalf? Now, there's multiple scholarly understandings of this. My father takes one that I had never heard, and I asked him where he wrote on this, and he couldn't remember, so I haven't actually been able to look into his research on this. He takes the view that baptism for the dead is a reference to taking a full mikveh for corpse defilement. Now, my father and I had quite a discussion about this yesterday because I said to him, if this is true, if what you're talking about is true, then it's the only place that I can find where the word baptism is directly linked to mikveh, that is ritual bathing. Now, I know that baptismo is used for washing hands in 2 of the Gospels. It's also talked about for washing utensils in a ritualistic form. So I'm not saying that there isn't some crossover there, but I don't find any place. Or at least I haven't been able to yet, and I'm willing to see this.
I thought we talked about this. I thought your dad wrote about it. It's in Ben Sirah, which was originally written in Greek or Hebrew, but it was translated into Greek in 1st century BC. I think it was translated to Greek in the late 2nd century BC, and it talks about those who are baptized for the dead, and if they touch a corpse again, what good did it do them?
I don't remember that conversation.
I don't remember if this was in our show or a side conversation.
I think this is a side conversation.
So
but
it is there anyway.
The problem that I'm having though is that I don't see how this would correlate to what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 15:29. In other words, it doesn't seem like he's talking about.
Well, the context is resurrection.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't understand I don't understand the link that would be made there. That's why I would want to see my father's research on this, because I don't see the link. It seems like that's trying to force something into the text to me. But I would need to see that. I would need to see
the way I understand it. And again, it's a topic I haven't thought about for a while. But how did the washing and the process by which a person who is contaminated by a corpse is restored to full fellowship and then is a candidate for worship again and coming into the temple and worshiping, that's where life is. Life is in holiness and purity and proximity to God. Death is when you're moved out of that because of sin and death that's in the world. And so it's not a function of sin. Like if someone dies and we tend to that body, we're actually doing what God said to do, but there's a temporal consequence of the week-long procedure of washing and there's a whole mystery here of how a priest who comes and ministers that cleanliness, they obtain a day's worth of corpse defilement just to come out and help with the process by which a person is restored back into the inside to purity where life is. And I think it's a picture of resurrection. So personally, it is a difficult passage, and it's led to crazy things. Like I think this is the verse where the Mormons will baptize. Like they got it right. The Mormons that they baptized like people who are alive, baptized in the name of deceased people, like weird stuff.
Can you bump your mic level up just a hair?
Testing 1 2 check. Did that make a difference here?
I don't know. Well,
test.
Okay, so that's one.
Anyway, it's a great.
What Rob is talking about is one avenue that I would need to study more before I took a hard view. Either way, the way that I've always understood it was in David Garland's commentary on 1 Corinthians. He gives 3 main views that are taken by scholars today. I've always taken his second view. This is what he says. And I pulled the full quote. It's a little bit long, but I think it'll help explain this. This is the reason that I believe the view that I currently hold is the reason I hold it is because of this commentary. He says, other views explain the term dead as a metaphor for the condition of believers who receive baptism. The recipients are in effect dead bodies when they are baptized. Understand on behalf of the dead to refer not to some third party, but to the subject, those who are being baptized. And paraphrases it, quote, otherwise, what do those hope to achieve who are baptized for their dying bodies? If the completed dead are not raised, why then are they baptized for themselves as corpses? This view has several advantages. Now he goes through the advantages. And one of the things that I found interesting is in his third advantage, he says, third, it is compatible with Pauline theology. Paul interprets baptism as a symbol of death and resurrection, and the dead either characterizes the individual's pre-baptismal state or refers to the individual's soon-to-be dead body. And then he says cross-reference Romans 6, 3 through 14, Ephesians 2, 1 and 5, and Colossians 2, 13, where Paul specifically talks about dead in your trespass, you were dead in your trespasses, all these kind of things. So the idea is when Paul says this in 1 Corinthians, what he's saying is, why are you going to get baptized? If there's no resurrection, if there's no resurrection, why get baptized into Christ at all? If you're a dead body and you're just going to go and be dead once you die and there's no resurrection, it doesn't matter. Why even get baptized? So that's always the view that I've taken. I could read this whole thing. I'm not going to, but that's always the view I've taken. However, I am more than willing to be shown how both what you have said and what my father has alluded to is the idea of a mikveh for the dead. Now, once again, I think that this would be interesting because it would be the first time in Scripture, at least, and I know that you've referenced Ben Sira, it'd be the first time in Scripture that I could find where a baptism, that is like something that wasn't a conversion baptism, was referred to as baptism.
Yeah, I mean, and again, one of the issues we have there is the lack of, we don't have the verb used in the Greek Torah, for example. So it's
right.
The use of Greek, of course, is a Second Temple period phenomenon, right? In the phenomenon for Jews to start using Greek and then try to express, their understanding of the Hebrew Bible in terms of Greek. And they didn't use the word baptizo in the verb, in the Greek Torah. So there's that difficulty. So in other words, if you're going to say, well, I'm going to just look up the word baptizo in the Greek Torah, you're not going to find it. And so, and that's a fair point.
Lois brings up one of the arguments that some people have said. She says, sounds to me like Paul is responding to an erroneous practice at the time, kind of jabbing at those doing that while retaining Sadducean mindset. The problem with this theory is, and Lois is not the first one to suggest this, but the problem with this theory is that we have absolutely no evidence that this was a practice in the first century. There's no evidence that anyone has been able to find to link either the Corinthians or any other pagan practice of baptizing for the dead. You only find it later, and tied specifically to Paul.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that view. I'm not opposed to the idea that this is a practice that is going on in Corinth or something at that time. But
And the hinge is on this the word necros or necros actually
Right.
in Greek. It can mean a corpse, right? Because it's an adjective, but it can just mean corpse, or it can mean substantively, it can mean a dead person.
right.
But it can just literally mean a corpse.
Well,
So-
what I was going to say is, for me to accept this notion that there was a practice, that he's speaking to a specific Corinthian practice, we'd need some evidence, some reference, any evidence at all that there's actually this kind of practice going on or that went on. And it wouldn't even have to be a lot. If you had I'm sure that if any evidence was produced, it would probably tip the scales one way or the other. Maybe not completely for some people, but it would at least give that view some leg room,
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we get to it? Shall we get to the main topic?
Are we not there yet?
We're not there yet. Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, so the very first clip that I got, we clipped John Piper, and we did this because
That's right. Yeah.
Rob was listening to John Piper and heard this. I have a lot of respect for John Piper, but due to the email that we got that we talked about first, let me just say I disagree with Piper, especially on his view of the law in the life of believers today. And
There's another example.
We've actually clipped John Piper before and his view on the Sabbath and talked about why we believe that John Piper is wrong on that. With that said, John Piper has been a great encouragement to me in my walk and my coming to Christ. And so I believe that I do owe him something as a tool of the Almighty to bring me closer to him. So this first intro is the very first clip, and I did not put the link to this in the show notes, and I apologize. This first clip is the first minute and 5 seconds of the video, and it's just a setup of what they're going to talk about. Now, after this setup, we'll stop. We'll talk a bit about what they're talking about.
And to be fair, this might be from 2000. This might be 2 years old or so. So this is not, to my knowledge, this isn't a brand new conversation. It just came on my radar. And I don't know. Is there a date on it? I don't know.
I could look, but
it's not a big deal. I just wanted to say that, to point out that my interest in this was just on content more generally, not on a timing issue of like some hot topic right now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's take a listen.
We were talking yesterday, and I shared with you Vancouver, close proximity to Seattle, and therefore close proximity over the years to the ministry in Seattle, Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll, and that made a dramatic impact on many people's lives. Many people from this ministry and people in around Vancouver traveled down to Mars Hill, watched it, listened, downloaded to many of Mark Driscoll's podcasts.
Yeah.
I know you've commented on your relationship with Mark on your own podcast, and I'm not asking you to comment on that relationship specifically. I'm more wanting you to speak into those individuals' lives where coming out of what's happened over the last year has really impacted them, called into question the church, leadership, does it work, can we trust it? People throwing even theological leanings under the bus because they equate it with the individual. And can you comment and encourage those individuals who have been impacted in that way?
Okay, so let's stop real quick and talk about this for a few seconds. We actually talked about this when this was going on, and this was years ago. For those who don't know, and I live in the Seattle area, and Rob lives somewhat he lives in the state of Washington. He used to live in Seattle. What's going on here is there was a church that was, I think that the church itself was probably worldwide known worldwide. Pastor Mark Driscoll made a name for himself, which it wasn't the greatest start for Mark. He was known in the Seattle area as the swearing pastor. And the reason why is because in his messages, he would use certain words that the average Christian was not prone to using. And so after he started to gain a following, he
There's
actually
a little shock. There was a little bit of
it was shock
he used
value.
shock
Right.
and awe, kind of.
Right. But he was very progressive in some of what he would teach about. His wife and him did a marital series from the pulpit talking about, and I don't think this was on Sunday. It might have been, but I don't think it was. But talking about marital relations, and that was they were sensitive about what they were talking about, but they were trying to help people who were married be able to talk about issues that normal pastors wouldn't be talking to people about. Whether or not that was right or not, that's neither here nor there. The one thing I can say about Mark and what he was doing was he was unapologetic about being at this time unapologetic about being a Calvinist. Which was kind of radical, I think, in these parts. He has since left his view of Calvinism and has rejected it. But he was very Bible centered in a lot of what he was preaching. And by the time Mars Hill took off, he had some real solid teachings. At the time that Mars Hill broke up, I'm not exactly sure of the numbers, but I think he had 23 churches in total, the satellite churches around, from Seattle all the way down into Texas. And I mean, these satellite churches were huge as well. And we had one here in Tacoma. And basically what would happen is people would get together. There was a worship band at the church, at the satellite church. There was a person that would kind of host. And then there was a huge screen, and the entire church would watch Pastor Mark's message on Sundays. And so that's why they were satellite churches of Mars Hill. And I'm not positive, but I think they also had a school. Now, I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, and so Pastor Mark was doing very well in terms of his reach. And Dr. Piper he heard a sermon by Pastor Mark on the inerrancy of the Bible, and thought this is just amazing, and contacted Pastor Mark and became somewhat of a mentor for Driscoll, for Mark Driscoll. Now, Dr. Piper has said, obviously, I wasn't a good enough mentor. He didn't listen to me, fully, because some things went down. Basically, this is not the accusation towards Pastor Mark was that he was running his church like a tyrant, and that he had misappropriated funds. And not to talk one way or the other on whether or not any of that was, what happened in that, I don't know. But basically, the result of that accusation was that all of the Mars Hill churches disbanded. And some of them became other churches. Some of them had leadership that was pretty much in place. I know Anchor Church down in Olympia I think that was a Mars Hill, and that became Anchor Church, and they have a fairly good structure now, and I think they're doing very well. The one here in Tacoma, I think, is still doing quite well. But there are others that did not make it. And because of that, especially in the Northwest where I live, there were a lot of people who were without a church body to go to. And even in my group, which is a very small group, we only have about 30 people, we have had people come from after Mars Hill disbanded. So, I mean, the reaching of this, at least in our area, was very, very dramatic. And so this is what they're talking about. And so this pastor, and I'm not sure who he is asking Dr. Piper to talk about the effects of this. Now, there's some great clips here, and I only clipped 3 more clips. So let's listen to the next one.
Biblically, God has historically been willing, I'm thinking of Philippians 1 now, been willing to use people to speak gospel truth who have motives and attitudes that are defective. So it says in Philippians 1, they were preaching the gospel to make Paul feel bad in prison. Mm-hmm. That stinks. Mm-hmm. And Paul says, what then? That Christ is proclaimed. Whether good motives or bad motives, I rejoice. So one way to process Mars Hill or any other ministry that has defective, whether the defect implodes like Mars Hill or not, whether defect to say, God is unbelievably merciful to use you and me with our defects to speak gospel truth.
Okay. This is a very interesting point because what Rob and I started talking about the other day, by the way, there's a fresh Messiah Matters More video up, which we did on Monday. But one of the things that we were talking about is the scripture kind of talks about this in both ways. The Philippians passage, which Dr. Piper just brought up, is to show, okay, these people were preaching the gospel, but praise the Lord because the gospel is being proclaimed. But on the flip side of that coin, at what point do we call out inerrant gospel? What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because, like, for example, if you look at Paul's epistle to the Galatians, it starts out and he's real hard line, calling these troublers, about these troublers. He wished they would cut themselves off, and then he's even calling the Galatians, you foolish, chapter 3, oh, you foolish Galatians, who's bewitched you, and there's other places we could think of too, where Paul, he taught, and I think Philippians, he calls them dogs, beware of the dogs. So who's he warning people about? Are these, and this is a debate within Christian world of scholarship, is he talking about Jews that reject the gospel in the first century and are trying to subvert the progress of the gospel? Or is it, some people say it's like Jewish Christians who have a works-based interpretation of the gospel, and they're going around trying to teach the gospel and works of the law, and Paul's arguing against them. So there's, and depending on which stance you take, you're going to read Philippians or Galatians or Romans differently. But in any event, we also have, Yeshua himself calling out people, with names like, pigs and serpents and, wolves in sheep's clothing. So the question is, when Paul in Philippians 1, which Dr. Piper just cited, says, you know what, independent of their motive, it doesn't really matter because Christ is preached, and in that I will rejoice. And it seems like what he's trying to say is, what, I can't control, I'm in prison. I
Right.
can't, I'm limited. I trust Yeshua. He said he's going to build the ecclesia. And who knows, maybe someone is going to hear, and they're going to hear through beyond the messenger. They're going to go, oh, I didn't know there was a guy called Yeshua, the Messiah, and that sounds important. I want to pursue that. And so they're temporarily listening to a false teacher or a teacher with wrong motives.
Right. And this is,
but what the Ruach did was, it's like, oh, there's something they take away, and then they're just going to disregard this guy, and they're going to pursue and hold on to that. That's how I think Paul is holding space for in
right.
Philippians.
And we talked about this in our Messiah Matters More. I brought up the idea of Benny Hinn, and that people have come to Christ through that ministry, albeit after they came to Christ, they then left that.
Right.
That
So
teaching.
question here, I don't think we got to it in the clip yet, but at some point, Piper says,
Oh no, hang on, wait, I clipped it.
are we going to get there?
Yeah, we'll get there. Hang on.
Okay,
just a
okay,
sec.
let's go.
Don't jump the gun on me, man. Come on, I clipped it.
Sorry, I started because I was like, is he still, it sounds like he still might hold to the doctrines of grace, Driscoll.
Driscoll said in one interview, and this was about a year ago or so, that the idea of Calvinism was a ridiculous idea.
Okay. I was just looking at his Wikipedia page, so who
And-
knows? Anyway,
and-
I don't want to misrepresent the guy.
And Twitter blew up. Even I
Okay,
commented on it. I mean, Twitter
Okay.
was ablaze.
He's not really the main topic here, but
Right.
right. Okay, keep going.
Okay, so this next clip is only 15 seconds long. This was such a good point that I had to clip it. It's a bit off topic, but let's take a listen.
To walk away from Jesus because Jesus' representatives are failures is to make an absurd choice. Jesus is our only hope.
Now, this is a very important point because I've seen this I've seen this time and time again, and I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it in the congregations that I've been a part of. Your leader, your pastor, your whatever you want to call him, is a man and is a human who is a sinner. If you are putting your trust and your hope in a man
Right.
outside of Yeshua, who is in fact God, then you are putting your trust in the wrong
This is an
thing.
argument for the Trinity too.
Exactly.
Because back to this idea of dead, the next verse of that 1 Corinthians, by the way, is Paul says, I die daily.
Right.
In other words, that the words that we speak that is true in knowledge, that's not birthed of this flesh and blood.
Right.
That's birthed from the Ruach, right? I mean, it's a mystery, and it's God's grace. Yeah, I'm full on board with what he's saying right here. It's absurd to think, and I've heard this before, but I went to that church and I hate the pastor, or the pastor said something I disagree with, and so therefore all Christianity is bogus, and I reject the Bible. And it's absurd. There's really a deeper issue, with that person.
Well, I mean, we see this a lot this happens a lot with the Torah movement as well, right? People will come and say, "Oh, yes, oh, we understand. We need to be keeping, we need to keep a kosher diet. We need to keep the Sabbath. All these kind of things." And then what happens? Somebody, the leader does something, or something. The people get disillusioned with the leader or whatever. They leave, and what happens? They don't hold fast to that. They go right back to, it's like, what was convicting you? Was the Holy Spirit convicting you, or was
Right.
the pastor convicting you?
Right. This is the wise and the foolish virgins. This is
Right.
At one point you can't differentiate among the group because it seems like they're all there for the same reason. And then the trial comes, and it separates.
Right.
Sometimes there's people kind of in the middle, like, oh, which side am I on? But he splits it.
I've told my family, if we didn't have a congregation, if we were under extreme persecution and we didn't have a congregation, we would do the same thing and believe the same thing in our house. Whether we had a congregation to go to, whether we had a leader to go to, whatever. We believe in God because we believe in the Bible, and we have been saved by faith. And if we have to find a congregation, we will leave. We will go to another place. We'll do whatever we have to do.
This gets back to building the ecclesia. Because I depend, for example, I look at your dad, Caleb, Tim Haig. I look at Ariel Berkowitz as major placeholders,
right?
Over a lifetime of giving their life for this ministry and taking a stand hermeneutically that is at odds with, and maybe not totally with, because Ariel Berkowitz would rejoice at the same Dr. Kaiser works that we would rejoice in, right? And we would also have the same thing, built-in obsolescence, we wouldn't agree with that, but we would still rejoice in all the good things that Dr. Kaiser has accomplished, because he too there were people pushing against his formulations, and so there's what I want to say is that, even if we didn't have a building to go to and we'd meet in our house, I still am in debt to an exegetical tradition of men. You know what I mean? It's not, I don't listen to every Christian preacher ever. I don't follow YouTube podcasts of every pastor. I can't. I have to, there's people who they'll just Google something and they'll just listen. For me, it's like, I've got a limited group of people that I trust and listen to. It doesn't mean I can't hear. Like, I'll listen to the Piper thing and I'll go, okay, and I'll say, okay, I accept this, but I don't accept that other thing. But that skill set and that discernment does not come easy. That comes because people have labored in the word, and they've taught and they've taught and they've labored and they've taught. And we are the beneficiaries of that. If the physical church buildings are taken away, my discipleship formation, my character formation is still a product of the labors of those people. So for example, if a new believer came and, didn't know Greek, didn't know Hebrew, and they were cut off from society and they didn't have access to Greek or Hebrew, they would, by the Holy Spirit, they would do the best, by what text they have. Now we're getting into what does it mean to have the access to the Word of God and interpretive history and stuff like that. But
ultimately, coming back to Piper's point and coming back to the point of you should see your pastors and your leaders as people who are sinners who have been charged to do something, but that doesn't make them perfect people. Ultimately, right. We think oftentimes of a trickle down. It starts with Christ, then the church leaders, and then the family unit and the structure in that. But you can think of it from the ground up as well. Our foundation is Christ. Next comes the personal relationship between you and Christ. Then comes the family structure and how the family works together to build that faith. And then comes the community structure and how the community, your family, works within that community to build that community up, to build the ecclesia. But ultimately, the people who are relying on their pastor, this is idolatry. It is a form of idolatry to put your pastor in the place that Christ should be. And this is exactly what Yeshua says when he says, call no man rabbi, or, don't let anybody call you rabbi, call no man father. He's not saying that you can't call your dad. What he's saying is as soon as you put your leader into a place that Christ should be in, that only Christ should be in, you have crossed the line. Because you have one Father in heaven, you have one Messiah, one Rabbi, and it's Yeshua. Okay, let's go to this last clip by Piper, and this is going to wrap us up. This is a minute and 16 seconds, so bear with me.
God must be the kind of general over his army that willingly accepts tactical defeats for strategic victories. That was a defeat. That was a tragedy. The debacle in Seattle is a tragedy from untold angles. Lots of people are hurt. It was a defeat for the gospel. It was a defeat for Mark. It was a defeat for evangelicalism. It was a defeat for Reformed theology, for complementarianism. It was a defeat. There's just not trying to whitewash anything. It was a colossal satanic victory. And the general is not out of control.
Yeah, amen.
The general didn't say, I don't know what I'm going to do in the Northwest now. I don't have Mark Driscoll anymore. Right. I just have a clue what I'm going to do in North America now. He's not. He didn't drop the ball. He's not sweating. He's not anxious. He doesn't know. He is totally in charge of this war. He permitted a tactical defeat for the gospel.
Okay, so the question that Rob asked me is, does Satan have victories?
Because the quote there was, it was a colossal satanic victory.
Right.
That's what Piper words. And that's what I told you, Caleb. I was like, you know what? I don't, that doesn't sit with me. I can't call it that.
I think the last thing that he says in that quote is probably the thing that I had to really latch onto. Let's listen to this end.
Totally in charge of this war. He permitted a tactical defeat for the gospel.
He permitted a tactical defeat for the gospel. In other words, all things work together for good for those who love Christ. Paraphrasing, right? But ultimately, Satan sees this, whether it's foolish of him or not. He sees this as a victory. Why? Because you have people who probably gave up on their faith, didn't find a church after Driscoll's church, right? Are staying at home now instead of being part of a body. Is that a victory for Satan? In those terms, I think it is. However, how many people were playing church there?
This is the issue. This is now getting to the issue. Instead of calling this a colossal satanic victory, I say this is a separation of wheat from chaff. In other words, people were calling good what God was not calling good. And what happened is they started building a house, and the house got bigger, and it was like a giant mansion, and people loved visiting this mansion, and they had parties there. They loved watching the sunsets together. They invited more and more people. And then all of a sudden the storm came and blew the sucker down because it was all built on sand. So that's not a victory for Satan.
I don't know if I don't know if I'd say it was all built on sand. I think that what I would say is there were mistakes made by leadership, and that the Almighty used that to shine a light. Now, here's the end all be all of that. I think that what you're saying is right in that most of the time when something happens in a church, there's a split, those kind of things. I think most of the time what people say is Satan is winning here, or Satan has attacked us. But what is rarely said is the Almighty is shining a light on hearts right now. In other words, the Almighty is doing a work here. It's usually when something like that happens, it's attributed to Satan is doing something.
So where is the actual church? If Yeshua says, I will build my ecclesia and the gates of hell will not prevail over it. So I have to look at that and say, okay, well, they were playing church, but it wasn't Yeshua building it. I mean, this is the thing. Does Yeshua build something and then Satan knocks some of it down? And then they're like, okay, I'm going to accept this temporary setback.
Chaffed in the wheat, man.
Or is Yeshua preparing building materials?
Right.
Right. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to let all these guys play church because of the Philippians 1 concept, right? That Paul is onto. Say, look, the gospel's being preached.
Yeah, but hang on just a sec. You can't say these guys, because I mean, certainly there were people who, when the chaff got blown away, there are people who are still in this. I mean, I know good Bible-believing Christians and pastors who stepped up to the plate and said, we're not going to let this go. In other words, look, the pastor of the church that was Mars Hill here in Tacoma, Bubba, he still preaches at that church. And he stepped up to the plate and said, I'll start preaching. And he did it. And now that church is thriving. Now, I'm not saying that I agree fully with that church's theology or anything like that. All I'm saying is that it seems to me like when Mars Hill exploded, and it is exactly what you're talking about. It was a sifting. Now, the question that I think needs to be asked is, was the chaff that got blown away a victory for Satan? Because I think that there is an element of there is evil going on. There are attacks on the church by the evil one, right? But look at Job. I mean, I think that Satan is being used as a tool for God's ultimate end goal. So this tool is being used by, the tool comes in and cleans house and takes what he can. It's like the thief coming in and grabbing his
right.
And
when we were talking about this other day, you mentioned Peter. Yeshua says before the cross, he says, Satan desires to sift you,
right?
But I will. I've prayed for you, and you're going to be restored. So Yeshua's already knows what's happening. He already knows in advance, and he says, you're going to be restored when you're restored. Okay. And then feed, the end of John, the feed my sheep part is part of that too. So the question is, at one point, Satan thinks he's doing a victory. Every time Peter cursed or said, I don't know, or denied Yeshua, Satan's like, yeah. But in the end, he's like, man, Satan's like, what he thought was a victory is just a bunch of like chaff. Like there's no victory there. I mean, that's the way it seems. Like in a way, when they're nailing Yeshua to the cross, Satan's like thinking that this is a victory. All the disciples are scattered. Peter's over there denying him. Everybody's afraid and hiding. And he's like, I've killed him. I've killed him. Satan seems to have, what's this victory?
Yeah. This is a beautiful picture that C.S. Lewis paints in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? Edmund has gone with the witch.
Yeah.
And then the lion comes and redeems Edmund, and the witch thinks that she has the victory.
Right.
She's going to kill the lion just to save this punk kid. But I mean, I think you're right. But at the same time, I think that, look,
Here's the question. What is, if we were to, let's take this idea of a satanic victory outside of the context of this Driscoll or Piper Driscoll argument, and just say, just from the Bible, if we were to talk about what is a victory for Satan, do we know, is there like a biblical foundation where we say, yeah, here's what a satanic victory would be. Now, I think Piper knows that this is ultimate, and that's why he says, well, maybe what it is, it's a tactical, on the tactical front, that the church is gaining wisdom because there's a ouch, there's a trial, there's a, oh man, we made some bad choices. But the overall strategy of the battle is still God's in charge.
I think that anytime a believer or anyone succumbs to sin, Satan sees it as a victory. And so this is how Peter, even though he's one of the elect, denies Yeshua, and it's seen as a victory for Satan. And in that respect, and I mean, we could look at anything. So, death in and of itself. I mean, the Holocaust. I always think of the Holocaust in these kind of conversations. Was this a victory for Satan? Certainly it was. So much death and just so much sin and evil. And I mean, I think demonic presence clearly is pushing so much of this. Hate has just enveloped people to the fact that they can do horrific and just atrocious things to other people, right? This is a victory for Satan in that sin is reigning in the hearts of men. At the same time, was there something that glorified Christ that comes out of this? Certainly the death of the Jews was not it. But how many people came to Christ? How many people, how many generations afterwards now have turned to defend Israel?
Well, here's another way to look at all the death by wicked fascism or totalitarian states in the 20th century. We're talking millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people. How many of them were believers?
Right.
So
this is a really hard one for me and my son. My son always says to me, "Dad, I have so many fears." He doesn't want to go to sleep by himself because he's afraid of the dark. And it's a very fine line for me to say, I have to be very careful not to say something like, you believe in God, so God will protect you. Because the last thing I want him to think is that nothing bad happens to believers.
Right.
At the same time, I want him to know, trust in the Lord. Because this life is just it's just a fleeting moment, and we will spend eternity with Christ.
Well, King David,
Right.
and of course Yeshua is an example. And Yeshua says, if they treated me this way,
Right.
the disciple's not above his teacher, and yeah. So, but we are to trust God. We are to affirm for the world and for ourselves that we are sons of Abraham. We're sons of the covenant.
You know what it just dawned on me?
And all the blessings thereof.
I completely agree with you. You know what just dawned on me, though? This conversation has to be totally different if you are an Arminian. If you don't believe in the sovereignty of God and you don't believe in God is in control of everything, right? In other words, a person can lose their salvation or whatever, then certainly Satan has victories. Because he can pull, if you hold to Arminian theology, then Satan can win the victory over you. You never have assurance that you're saved.
Right. Right. And that the church, how could you be, here's an interesting question. How could you be an Arminianist and assert, like Yeshua says, I will build my ecclesia and the gates of hell will not prevail over it? How could you hold, how do they understand that verse?
See, this is why James White always continues to say that Arminian theology, its logical conclusion is open theism. That is that God is not in control of anything and doesn't know, and his prophecy is just a guess
and
of the future.
It's all he handed all over to man.
Educated guess, and now it's just he's taken his hands off the wheel. Cletus take the wheel, and
instead of Jesus take the wheel, it's okay. Adam take the wheel.
Yeah, Cletus take the wheel. Anyway, the point is now it's where does the car go? God just kind of took his hands off the wheel, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And the interesting thing is that most of the people I know hold to Arminian theology. I would say I'm very much the minority when it comes to my views of the doctrines of grace. However, no one has been able to give me a good explanation of how this works if God is in control of all, and all things work together for good for those who love Christ, if our salvation is not secured. If God doesn't know, and if he does really know, if God really knows, then do we really have a choice? That's not... Now you're seeping into Calvinistic theology. Okay. It's been a good conversation. I hope that people have enjoyed it. I'm sure we'll get a lot of emails and comments on that one. Yeah. All right. Well, we got to all of our topics, and hopefully we'll have some more great stuff for you next week. I hope that this has been uplifting, and give us a call on our comment line. It's 253-465-3205. 253-465-3205. You won't talk to us. You'll just get an answering machine, so you can say whatever you want. Tell us that you love, hate, whatever. It's it's up to you. You can also send us email, chegg@torahresource.com. It's chegg@torahresource.com. Go to Torah Resource and find all sorts of wonderful and free resources. All right. We hope that this conversation has glorified our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? Well, because Messiah matters.